welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'direi Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So here we are. Okay. So at this point, uh, you know, something something doesn't make sense. No, here we go. We got to 35 let's see. We got there. Uh, hmm, I for for some reason I feel like we did more of this. Yeah, I'm sort of remembering this. Yep. Okay, here we are. Good, that's the place we are. Vatamot Dvora, and Dvora passed away. Meineket Rivka, Rivka's nurse. Vatikaver mitachat levet el tachat alon, and she was buried below Beth El, below the alon, this tree there. Vayikra shmo alon bachut, and it was known as the alon. Sometimes I think alon is known as an oak tree of crying, of weeping. So let's take a look at the Rashi. I have a feeling that, honestly, that this is an example of biblical euphemism, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by that if once we get through the Rashis, right?
Okay.
Let's take a look. Vatamot Dvora, and Dvora passed away, died. Ma inyan Dvora bevet Yaakov. What is Dvora doing in Jacob's household? Ella, however, Lefisha Amra Rivka Yaakov, it's because because Rivka said to Jacob, V'shalachti v'lakachti chamisham, that when she sent him off, she said to Jacob, her son, that when Esau's wrath subsided, she would send for him. Right? I will send and get you from there. Shalcha Dvora. So what did she do? She sent Dvora. Well, if Dvora was Rivka's nurse, do we mean she was? I think we have to mean not that she nursed Rivka. She would have been quite aged, but simply that she acted as a nurse, right? They didn't have baby bottles at the time. They had wet nurses, and that's what I think. So Dvora was Rivka's wet nurse. So she would have quite possibly actually nursed Jacob. Anyway, Shalcha Dvora etzlo, she sent Dvora to him, the Padan Aram, Latzet Misham, to go out from there. Umeta Baderech, and she died on the way. In other words, on the way. I think in this way we're talking about obviously on the way back. All right? And Rashi puts in a little personal note here, as he does from time to time. Midivrei Rabbi Moshe Hadashan lamadatiha. I learned this from the words of second of from the words of Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan. So that's what we learned there. Okay, let's keep going. So we've mentioned this Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan a number of times already. Mitachat laVeit El, below Beit El. Ha'ir, so he explains, what do you mean below Beit El? Ha'ir Yoshevet Bahar, the city was located on a mountain. Excuse me, 1 second. Sorry. Was located on a mountain. V'nikbara beraglei ha'ar, and so she was buried at the foot of the mountain. Tachat ha'alon, below the alon. Okay. B'shipule meshara. Excuse me again. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. So the shipule meshara means the shipule would be the lower part. Meshara would be a plain, or a valley. Shahaya mishor milamala, because there was a plain, a flat area, milamala, on the upper side. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. B'shipua hahar, on the slope of the mountain. V'hakvura milamata, and the actual burial took place below. Umeshor shel Beit El hayu korin lo alun. Interesting. So okay. I translated alon as an oak tree or as a tree, but he is saying, Rashi has saying that the plain of Bethel, the flat area, the tabletop, so to speak, of Bethel, hayu korin lo alon. That was called alon. So it's so interesting. I've read this so many times, and my memory plays tricks on me. And at any rate, that's what they meant by alon. So, okay. I'm sure there may be other opinions if you look at English translations. The Agada, and the Agada is Nitpaser Sham Be'evel Sheni. He was informed there of a second mourning, Mourn, Shehu Gadlo, because he was told there, Al Imo Shemeta, regarding his mother who had died. And that's in Bereshit Rabbah. So clearly, the rabbis of Bereshit Rabbah also understand this sentence as an example of biblical euphemism. So that what the way biblical euphemism sometimes works is that instead of referring to the person who's actually involved, they sometimes refer to another person. So that instead of saying that Rachel died because it is so, sorry, that Rivka died, they are mentioning Dvorah, her nurse, her wet nurse, as dying. So that is actually a reference to Rebecca's death at this point. Here we go. All right, let's take a look. Velashon ve'alon. Okay, so now he's got another interpretation of the word alon. So this is according to this Agada. Ve'alon belashon Yavani Avel. Here it says that the word alon in Greek means mourning. Okay. But look at the notes. See, there's a little footnote here, and it's down here. Tzarich lomar, what we really need to say. Tzarich lomar, acher. Instead of, he sees that this evel is a misprint, and that the word in Greek actually means another, right? Along with Dvorah's death. There was along with that. V'chein ita Rashi, and it's interesting. It says that this is what Rashi says in his commentary on Psalm 109. So that this is actually a misprint, and Rashi actually does translate in this word alon like along, right? Along with, together with. So there's there may be some English derivative there of the Greek alon. Ulefichach he'elimo, right? And because we're talking about Rivka, his mother's death, right? This was he'elimu. This is why they don't state it. And I think he'elimu means that the scriptural text doesn't mention it explicitly. Okay? So again, although let's take a look. Sfarim Achirim, there are other texts of Rashi that say Ulefi Shehelimu, right? So here he says Ulefichach, and consequently, but the sentence goes on there, right? And for this reason, they covered up at Yom Motah, her day of death. And the other Rashis say Ulafi, right? They don't have the kach there, right? It might have been a lafi with a little slash mark, and but according to this editor of Rashi, he feels it should be and because Ulafi means and because Shehelimu et Yom Motah, the day of her death, Shelo Yekalalu Habriot, so that the nations, others, should not curse hakeres. This is the curse that they would be cursing. In other words, that they would curse Rivka. The belly, right? Sheyatsa mimenu Esav, from whom Esau came out. Afakatuv lo pirsama. And for this reason, Scripture itself doesn't want to uh, broadcast the fact of Rivka's death, so that they shouldn't mention it in that regard, right? That, and perhaps I'm trying to think, yeah, that they would say, well, that's the reason she died. And again, I'm wondering if this is another example of saying Esav instead of Yaakov. Just occurred to
I'm
me.
I'm
Yeah.
not following your conundrum.
Okay. Okay. All
I'm
right.
sorry.
This last place, when you say, are you referring to the euphemism, or are you talking about the Midrash Rabbah's explanation as to why they covered up Rivka's death? They don't actually mention her passing. Which part?
Yes, why do they do that?
Why they don't mention Rivka's passing? Um, Well, apparent, however one wants to understand that somehow in mentioning her death, right? If they mentioned her death, uh, people would say, well, there we are. See, she died. She never got to see Jacob again after he left. And we can either take it at face value that saying that because Esau was such a murderer and a violent human being, some way of cursing is his mother, cursing Esau's mother. So that's one possibility. Another possibility that I just am thinking of today is that they would be cursing Rivka, that the fact that she never got to see Jacob again as somehow justifying her, saying she got what she deserved. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I also am trying to understand the point that they're making here. I understand the issue of saying we don't sometimes when you mention somebody, you associate other things with that person, and sometimes, simply because they're being mentioned. And this particular association would be, in a sense, by way of a curse, saying something really nasty about someone, about Rivka in this case. Please follow up, Judith, if you're still not too comfortable with my explanation.
No, that's good. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right. And let's go on. I think we got the next. Yes, let's keep going. All right. New paragraph. Vayera Elohim El Yaakov Od, and God appeared to Jacob again. Bevo'o mi Padan Aram, when he arrived from Padan Aram, Vayvarech Oto, and he blessed him. So the question is, what do we mean this Od? What's the strength of this word again, right? Let's see, take a look. Od, Pa'am Sheni, in other words, a second time, B'makom hazeh, in this particular place. Echad belechto, he blessed him one time when he departed from Beersheba, ve'echad beshuvo, and a second time when he came back. So both when he left, when Jacob left, and when Jacob returned, he was blessed. And that's something sort of one can play around with a little bit, right? Vayvarech oto, so he blessed him. Interesting Rashi, based on Bereshit Rabbah, Birkat Avelim. He blessed him with the blessing of those who are mourners. So this is, in other words, that was the blessing that he was saying that he should be blessed with consolation, which certainly indicates the how sad this moment was. And consider it, right? Consider it in terms of the narrative that he has to leave. He's forced to leave his mother, right? 20 years before, and he never gets to see her again. Never gets to see her again. And that's, you know, I mean, that's a very sad, that's a tragic, an element of tragedy involved in this story. And of course, these sorts of things are going to be part of Jacob's fate, so to speak. So the idea of God consoling Jacob on his way back. Now, what I want to say is that if you notice, this is an example of biblical interpretation by conjunction. In other words, we just read about Dvorah's death, and that's why we can explain the blessing. In other words, we want to connect one verse to another verse, and very often it's a very typical kind of interpretation that understanding the biblical text is one of the ways is by means of connecting two apparently unrelated verses and saying, well, wait a second, why are they following the way they do? In other words, that the Bible is so carefully written that one sentence basically has a connection to its following sentence. And we, of course, know that one of the fundamental ways in which we gain meaning and understanding is contextually. Context is a tremendous, powerful way of finding meaning in words and in sentences. And that's what we're doing here as well. We're applying it in a more, let's say, can I say, academic way, but nevertheless, that's what we're doing. And it's based on this assumption that the Torah is this incredible, divine, powerful, brilliant work where everything is done with great consideration. So, going on. Vayomer lo Elohim, and God said to him, Shimcha Yaakov, your name Jacob. Lo yikare shimcha od Yaakov. So I guess we could say, as to your name Jacob, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, Yaakov, ki im Yisrael, but rather Israel. Yesh mecha shall be your name. Vayikra et shmo Yisrael, and he called his name Israel. Now we know this is not the first time we're reading about this, right? Because remember, when Jacob wrestled with the angel, the angel named him Yisrael. But here we're saying that his name Yisrael, in fact, has a divine origin to it. And we'll take a look at the Rashi. Let's take a look. So, Lo yikare shimcha od Yaakov. Your name shall no longer be referred to as Jacob, and it's Lashon. So the connotation, right, the meaning of this name Jacob, right, which is related to heal. Lashon Adam haba lema'arav. I don't see the vowels, so let's say either ikva or akava, possibly one of the two. Perhaps something else, but that's got to be it, right? So akov in Hebrew means crooked, right? Ma'arav is to be lurking, to ambush. In other words, the fact that by holding on to Esau's heel, that's when he was named Jacob, was that he was trying to supplant Esau to prevent him from doing what he wanted. And again, someone who lurks is trying to prevent someone, and a cave, there's a famous verse that says V'yehakov lemishor, and the crooked path will become straight. I think it's in Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah 40 that he uses that statement where he talks about a highway to God. So it's no longer going to be understood that way. Ella Lashon, but it is going to have the meaning of Sar v'Nagid, a prince and a ruler. So this is, again, this is, I think, as I reflect on it, a really beautiful and powerful theme, because I think the very fact that of all the patriarchs, Jacob is the one that in the narrative shows the most character development of all three of the patriarchs. And that there's a deep lesson here that no matter what one's beginnings are like, no matter what path you start off with, even if it's a crooked path, that you still have the potential for greatness. And that if you learn the lessons of life, and if you learn from your mistakes, you have a great future, and not to give up hope, not to feel that, that your fate is sealed basically at birth, right? But that you have that ability through your experiences to gain wisdom and to gain greatness. And that's, I think, one of the, at least it's a message that I feel comes out of this particular narrative, that particular element of the narrative. And I think it's important because I think one of the worst things you can feel is that you're hopeless, that you have, that the mistakes you've made are going to basically uh, detract from your life forever and not see them as possibly, stepping stones to achieving wisdom. So going on. Vayomer lo Elohim. And Elohim said, God said to him, Ani El Shaddai, I am El Shaddai. Pray urve, be fruitful and multiply. He certainly has been doing this as I reflect on those words. Goy uka, a nation, ukahal goyim yemi mecca, a nation and a kahal, a crowd, literally it means, right? Or a group of nations, yemi mecca, will come out of you. Umelachim, and kings, mechalatzecha, from your loins, yetsu, will come out. So here he is. He started out, as he says himself, that he crossed the Yabok with nothing more than his cloak and his staff. And here he is coming out and returning with this blessing of the future, that he and his family will ultimately become a great nation, in which include even kings. Here we go. Ani El Shaddai, right? I am El Shaddai. Sha'ani Kidai, right? I have all the resources. And that's that idea of Shaddai, right? Which is translated as Almighty. And it's quite possible that as you think of the word Almighty, it in fact captures what it's saying here. Ani Kidai levarech, right? He says, so God is saying to him, I have all the resources to bless. Shehabrachot Shali, because the whole nature of blessing comes from me, right? All the blessings are under my control. That's what he's saying to him. Pre urve, right? So he says, be fruitful and multiply, right? So interesting, right? Rashi is capturing that question that I was raising because it sure seems like he's been fruitful and multiplying. He's got 11 sons and a daughter that we know of, right? Al Shem. So why does he say be fruitful and multiply? Rashi is capturing the idea that he's saying you still are going to have that opportunity. Why? Al Shem she'adayin lo nolad binyamin, because Benjamin himself, he had not yet been born. Benjamin had not been born. The afal pi shekvar nit avra mimenu, and even despite the fact that Rachel had become pregnant, she was pregnant with Benjamin at the time. And he says Goy, that when he refers to Goy, he's referring to Benjamin, Goyim, nations, right? And this is again Bereshit Rabbah, Menashe Ephraim. That is a reference to Menashe and Ephraim. Those are two of Joseph's sons. Sha'atidim latzet miyosef, that in the future would come out of Joseph. Vehem b'minyan hashvatim. And remember, they're counted as two of the tribes. So there's some really cool stuff involved here. And as I was thinking about it, right, what's interesting, remember, much later on, after the kingdom was divided, right? So Solomon had a son, King Solomon. The kingdom was still united under King Solomon. This is, of course, years and years later. And after Solomon, he had a son, Rehoboam, and the kingdom split under Rehoboam. And 10 of the tribes were in the north, and 2 of the tribes, namely Judah and Benjamin. Judah and Benjamin were the southern tribes, and those are the two tribes that survived because the 10 northern tribes were attacked by the Assyrians and were sort of basically buried into the kingdom of Assyria, into their empire. But it's interesting that Benjamin is getting this special mention here. So, okay. Lots more, of course, that could be said about that whole element of Jewish history. Umlachim and kings, and again, Bereshit Rabbah. Shaul. So, of course, the very first king of Israel came from the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, King Saul. The Ishbosheth was one of Saul's sons. Shahayu Mishevet Binyamin, because they came from the tribe of Benjamin. Sha'adain lo nolad, okay, because, well, this means he's not yet born. Let's go on and really and truly look at this. We've got a parenthesis here. So let's see, it looks like a major parenthesis because it doesn't end until over here. So let's take a look at what this says. Upasuk ze de Rashi, right? And this verse, oh, sorry. Uh, no, Darshu, right? And this verse, I believe, they interpreted as Avner, okay? Okay, Avner was King Saul's major general, and he actually, he crowned, after Saul died, Avner crowned Ishbosheth, his son, who was actually a very weak person. And Avner knew that he himself was not entitled to the monarchy, but that he'd be able to control Ishbosheth. Okay, and so he crowned him as the king after Saul. Keshimlich Ishbosheth, Avner, when he crowned, right, Ishbosheth, va'af hashavatim, and even the tribes, darshuhu. So I would have to say they required it, something in that way. The karvu Binyamin, and they draw close Benjamin. Dichtiv, as it says in the book of Judges 21, Ish mimenu lo yiten et bito leVinyamin. This goes into a whole other story in the book of Judges, where some people from the tribe of Benjamin abused a woman. This is probably okay. So we go, right? So the rest of the tribes said that they would not, in fact, give their women to anybody from the tribe of Benjamin, the Isha as a woman, the Chazru, and they retracted. The Amru, and they said, Ilmale haya ole min hashvatim, right? If he did not come up from the tribes, lo haya Kadosh Baruch Hu omer liYaakov, right? I think, in other words, if Benjamin didn't count as one of the tribes, lo haya Kadosh Baruch Hu omer liYaakov, the Holy One, blessed be He, never would have said to Jacob, umlachim mechalatzecha yetzu, that kings will come out of your loins. This is where we're going to stop now. It is there's a lot of reference, obviously, to other parts of the Bible here, and we can talk about it another time if you wish. But I'm going to set my marking here. Give me a moment for me to do that, and then I'm going to stop the share so I know where we are. So that's where we got to, and yes, okay. And we're discussing this verse here. Excuse me, sorry. Give me a moment here to set this up. Okay, we're still dealing with this verse, and thank you. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. So any last comments before I stop the recording? Okay, very good.